Good morning, Metalheads here, and welcome to a new episode of the Metal Meltdown. And today we're looking at the latest album from Sworn Enemy entitled Gamechanger. Originally a very influential and important band in the New York City hardcore scene, Sworn Enemy in these last couple years have gone out of their way to implement more and more metal influence into their sound. Which isn't, in my opinion, a bad thing. I've enjoyed the crossover thrash and metallic hardcore outputs of this band, and I've even come to rely on them as a pretty consistent and dependable band for that genre. But from what I understand, other people don't necessarily feel the same way, and reactions are a little bit mixed across the board, and there are definitely people out there nowadays wishing that the band would dip their toes back into the world of hardcore, especially considering that hardcore has had a real resurgence in these last few years with bands like Code Orange and Title Fight and Turnstile and Jesus Piece. Interestingly, that all coincides with the timing of the band's 15th anniversary, so yeah, I can definitely understand why people might want that. But the boldly titled Gamechanger has other plans for Sworn Enemy, as the band is dipping their toes even further into the metal pool, going as far as to enlist Robb Flynn of Machine Head as the album's producer. That might have been kind of interesting if we were dealing with a post-The Blackening Robb Flynn, but unfortunately we're dealing with a post-Catharsis Robb Flynn. A Robb Flynn who's perhaps become a bit too open for his own good, and seems to be going through a bit of a midlife crisis, trying to revisit as many moments and sounds from the late 90s as possible on the album Catharsis. An album so reviled by the Machine Head fanbase that even members of Machine Head fucking quit over it. And let's just address the elephant in the room right away. Robb has way too much influence on this album. So much so that I almost wonder if these are actually demos left over from Catharsis. Grooves have always been a part of the Sworn Enemy sound, but they've also been used sparingly and often used to embolden the hardcore and the thrash influences to provide a little bit of drama amongst the more so minimalistic music. Here, however, it's all grooves. In fact, they're aping Machine Head pretty bad, even aping some of the most questionable moments from other bands' careers. Take, for instance, opening track Prepare for Payback, which almost plays out like a cut off of God Hates Us All. Which by no means is a terrible album, but it's not one I ever want Slayer to revisit, so I'm not sure I want Sworn Enemy to revisit it. Following track Seeds of Hate takes it even further into total Machine Head territory, with slow, pulsing, almost breakdown-like grooves, and a lot of very dry, throaty vocals reminiscent of 2000's Robb Flynn. Speaking of which, following tracks Coming Undone and Justify suffer almost directly from some of the shit we heard on Catharsis. Not quite as disastrously, mind you, but I wouldn't go as far as to say it's good. Coming Home, for instance, opens on an incredibly emotionless and vanilla acoustic number, the type of thing that would have absolutely been heard on Catharsis, before stumbling into some pretty by-the-books kind of metalcore, crossover thrash kind of stuff. Maybe separately these two parts would work okay together. In fact, I can even see someone banging their head to the heavier parts of Coming Undone, but unfortunately they've been sandwiched together into an aesthetically unpleasing mess. Justify follows with an attempt to address modern American politics, but instead it just feels completely hollow. I mean, it's got a boring little spoken word piece that goes nowhere in the very beginning and immediately launches into some of the most generic riffs you've ever heard in your life. A lot of bassy thuds and open tab grooves, the kind of shit that I'm sure if you were 12 would probably sound fucking spectacular, but now it doesn't. And by the time we get to Consequence, the band almost start to sound like Five Finger Death Punch, encouraging you at home to chant along and pound your fist in the air. Yeah! Thankfully, the album recovers somewhere in the middle with tracks like DOA and Fragments of a Broken Life, but only because they lean so much heavier on the actual thrash metal influence. In fact, DOA itself feels like a straight-up crossover thrash banger, with some more metallic guitar flares and more modern American influence. I know fans are generally mixed on the band's crossover thrash sound, but trust me, after hearing stuff like Seeds of Hate and Justify and The Consequence, I think you're going to welcome it with open arms. I think Sworn Enemy and Robb Flynn have grossly miscalculated on this album. It just doesn't work. There are brief flashes here and there that work, but it's not enough to recommend buying this album. It's enough to say, hey, look up 2 or 3 songs on Spotify, but I wouldn't exactly call that a glowing endorsement. The band performs fine. They're a tight-knit unit at this point. They've been playing for 15 years. They know their shit. I put the blame solely on Robb Flynn, if we're being honest. I know that sounds mean to say. He's had a rough year with the release of Catharsis, but I gotta be honest, like, all the problems I see here, I see stemming from Robb Flynn putting his foot in the door and saying, you should start doing things more like that. Because, like, all the things that hurt Catharsis are on this album. Sworn Enemy comes out of it a little better because enough of them is still here. But, you know, I think it's safe to say that this album probably would have been a lot different if it were not for the influence of Robb Flynn. It's getting to the point where I almost have to wonder if Robb Flynn maybe just needs to step back from music for a while, because everything he touches is just turning to shit. I'll give this thing a 2 out of 5. I have no doubt in my mind that Sworn Enemy fans are going to be very mixed on this record, much like previous records. If you're looking for like just some straight up meat and potatoes, simple American metal, go for it. I mean, there's nothing offensive or truly incompetent on this record. In its best moments, it's a somewhat competent, if perhaps flavorless and unintuitive record. In its worst moments, it sounds like the kind of shit I would hear bursting from a speaker in a trailer park. I guess it kind of depends on what you're into. Like, if you're nostalgic for the days of, like, some nu metal and early 2000s Machine Head, you can kind of get down with some of the first couple tracks. If you're down with, like, some good old American thrash metal with some hardcore influences, you can get down with songs like DOA. It's just hard to recommend the entire album because it's just not consistent and it's not well arranged and, well, not a game changer, frankly. 2 out of 5, a poor record and a low moment for Sworn Enemy. Here's hoping that, unlike Catharsis, this is forgotten relatively quickly, because that's honestly the best thing that could happen for Sworn Enemy, I think. And that is it for the Metal Meltdown. I'm not an expert, nor do I claim to be, so what do you think? Do you like this record? Do you not like this record? And what do you want to hear from me next? Thank you for watching. Make sure you press subscribe so you get updates on the Metal Meltdown fucking immediately. And you have yourself a fantastic fucking day.